Hello and welcome everyone. This is going to be a samurai point of view or POV in the detailed understanding of how to play a samurai. I'm going to go through all of the samurai abilities, the traits, not too much focused on the traits. So if I misplaced a certain action during whatever level the trait comes up as, just disregard that. It's going to be everything from level 50 to 81. And that includes everything at level 1. So as soon as you unlock Samurai, how do you play it? I'm going to try to go through that sort of stuff. I'm not a salesman. I'm not good at this sort of thing. I'm only good at it because I do some heavy editing and I have a script in front of my face. No script, so if you hear me talking a lot of nonsense, then I apologize, but that is how it is. And that was a minute of padding, so let's go ahead and get this started. Wow, I wasted so much time. Anyway, the first thing is Hikaze, pretty standard, pretty straightforward weapon skill. Let's just skip that, we're going to go through too many of those anyways. Second thing is Jinpu, and then Third Eye as our third. So, Hikaze, you're going to spam a lot of these. And after that, we're going to do a Jinpu, and then Shifu at level 18. So this is going to be Jinpu. It's going to give you a buff eventually. It's now called Fugetsu. And then the opposite for Shifu at level 18. It's going to give you a buff called Fuka. Now, Fugetsu, which you get it by doing Jinpu. Mind you, Jinpu is executed after Hikaze. You can't just toss Jinpu without it. You're going to do the same potency as an auto attack, which is 100. Just make sure it lights up. Hikaze, Jinpu lights up, or Shifu lights up, go ahead and press it. Get yourself that buff or reset it. Let's talk about the buffs. I'm not quite sure at what level, but you will get these buffs eventually. One is called Fugetsu, which increases damage, and the other one is called Fuka, which basically makes you go fast. It makes you go faster. Your first priority is to get Fuka. Fuka make you go faster, that's your first priority. In other words, Shifu before Jinpu. Shifu before Jinpu. Fuka before Fugetsu. Next up is Third Eye. It changed in Endwalker. It now gives you a 3-second duration to cut damage, incoming damage by 10%. And if you do receive damage within that time, you will get 10 gauge. That's all it does. And we get MP and then also Fuga. So MP, long range, if you can't, reach your target with an auto attack or a weapon skill, just use NP on the target. Just spam it till you get back into range or the target is, targetable by weapon skill or weapon skills, auto attacks. And then after that, we get, what was the other one? Fuga. Fuga is your standard AoE prerequisite. So just like the Hikaze, you get Fuga. You should get a frontal cone. There should be an example on your screen right now, so I don't spoil it for you for the upgraded Fuga. But just go ahead and spam that if you have no other continuation for weapon skill. Now we're talking about finishers. So the first finisher is at level 30. It will be Gecko. The second one is at level 40, which is Kasha, and then the third is Yukikaze, which is basically a non-existent one that you don't really need. These are all single target finishers, by the way. So the first one's Kasha. Why is it first? Well, because you're going to be using Shifu first, and in order to get Kasha, you need to use Shifu. And then we're going to do that Kasha. So when you do finishers, you're going to get a sigil. You can see the sigil on the bottom right corner here. I just did the Kasha. It's going to give you a flower. We're going to go back, Hikaze, Jinpu, get our buff. Now we're going to do Gecko. Kasha is flank, Gecko is rear. I just did Gecko, so I got the crescent moon. Now we're going to finish with Yukikaze. Yukikaze just requires 2 weapon skill, just 1 chain, Akaze into Yukikaze. Yukikaze is never used in single target unless you need to do the finisher, but we'll get to that eventually. And that is going to give you your 3 sigils. Yukikaze is more like a snowflake. It looks like a snowflake, but it is a katana's guard, I believe. But to me, it just looks like a snowflake. We'll call it that. So once you have your 3 sigils, you get the Midare, which should be level 50. You get Iaijutsu at level 30, which basically gives you a button that it looks like this, but you will not get an actual activation until you get a sigil. 1 sigil gives you Higenbana. 2 sigils gives you Tenka Goken, and then 3 gives you Midare. Midare is your single filler finisher. What I mean by filler, it means that while you do not have anything else to use these sigils on, you need to make sure you get rid of them. If you have a sigil and you have a weapon skill chain that gives you that same sigil, they do not stack. So make sure you get rid of your sigils before you toss another one on top of it. So now we're going to talk about the actual Iaijutsu. Notice how it's grayed out right now. I really can't do anything because I don't actually have an action. So we're going to talk about the first sigil. We're going to go back to, let's do a Kasha. Kaze, Shifu. Remember, flank for Kasha. Now that we have a sigil, Iaijutsu turn into Higenbana. Higenbana is going to be your damage over time on target. If you have individual single targets that is not 3 or greater, you're going to be using Higenbana. If you have 2 targets individually, you're going to toss Higenbana on both targets. If the targets are dying too fast, just go ahead and ignore Higenbana and just go straight for Midare, which is your 3 sigil finisher. But remember, the key pact is the targets are individual. They're not stacked. If there's 2 targets stacked, just go ahead and do your normal rotation and do the follow-up as Higenbana. But as soon as they have 3 targets stacked, that's when it becomes an AoE situation. We're going to talk about AoE here real soon. But once you have Higenbana, just go ahead and toss it on the target, and it's going to give you a 60-second timer, a minute. As soon as the minute goes on the target, we're going to basically go rinse and repeat back and forth with Midare. And we're just going to keep using that Midare chain on a target till the Higenbana damage over time expires. And then we're going to reapply the Higenbana. Now, I'm going to stop my rotation right here. Most Samurai new players would immediately just toss the Midare right here, but the smart choice is to continue and refresh the first buff that you applied yourself with, which is the Fuka. Now is a good time to toss your Midare. If I continue with Kasha, I would get a sigil, but since I already have it, let's go ahead and toss the Midare and then the Kasha. Rinse and repeat, replace the sigils, but never overlap them. Since we already have Fuka, we're going to go and get ourselves Jinpu. And then Gecko for the finish. We don't have our Higenbana, so we're going to go ahead and toss the Midare, just like before. Make sure you get that Shifu. Don't toss our Kasha till you've burnt all the sigils. We're going to apply that rule again to Midare. So instead of doing the Midare immediately, we're going to do our Jinpu first. We're not going to toss our Gecko first. We're going to toss Higenbana first to remove our sigils and then reapply with Gecko to get the 1 back. So let's speed it up. And congratulations, you are level 50 samurai, but you're now a professional. So we're going to finish off with the level 50 samurai POV with a Mekkyo Shisui. So how do you toss Mekkyo Shisui? And where do you toss it? We're going to reset aggro on this. So Mekkyo Shisui is going to basically make it so that we can toss finishers without the actual prerequisite weapon skills. So we can toss things like Gecko, what is the other one? Yukikaze and Kasha right back to back. In the ideal opener, we're going to get our buffs first. We're going to toss the Kasha. We're going to apply Higanbana. We're going to go back with Gecko, but before we toss the Gecko, here is where the Mekkyo Shisui changes the opener slightly. So the thing about Mekkyo is that you never want to toss Yukikaze. Reason being, it does low potency and it just doesn't work well with it. The only things you should be tossing with Mekkyo is Gecko and Kasha and or. That is during single target. If it's AoE, you're going to be tossing the Mangetsu and the Oka, which of the AoE is pretty straightforward. I think I can just explain the AoE opener in the short 5-minute video. It's pretty straight, pretty simple way of doing AoE opener for Samurai. So we're going to do, with the experience that you guys have already accumulated through the past 10 minutes or so, you guys should understand what I'm about to do right now. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to toss my MP and get into melee range. We're going to do Akaze into Shifu, get into flank for Kasha, back to Akaze into Jinpu. Higanbana, Gecko, Kaze, Yukikaze, Media Mekkyo, Kasha, Finisher, Midare, Kasha, Gecko. So now we have both sigils. We can just continue the rotation with the Kaze, Yukikaze, and then based on which buff is the lowest number, we can do the continuation from there. So since our Fuka is pretty low, we're going to do a Shifu. We're going to stop here. Midare. Kasha. We're going to go back, do our Jinpu. We're going to stop here. Our Higanbana expired. Reapply Higanbana. We're going to do our Gecko. Now since our Mekkyo is back up, we're going to do a Yukikaze instead. Instead of you just, going backwards and between the two sigils, once your Mekkyo comes up, we're going to completely ignore the two. We're just going to go straight for the Yukikaze. Mekkyo up. Midare finish. Kasha. And Gecko. And then just rinse and repeat. Before you toss a EI-Jutsu finisher, make sure you do the reapply buff of either Shifu or Jinpu, but never do the finisher of either Gecko or Kasha, because those two will give you another sigil, which most of the time will basically makes it so that you toss something like the Tenka during single target, which is a bad use of sigil. It'll make you look strange to the rest of your party members. Why is he doing AoE finisher single target? Speaking of AoE, the Fuga is pretty straightforward. Fuga into Oka, and then Fuga into Mangetsu. This is Oka, and then Mangetsu. Gives you your 2 sigils. Step away for a bit. This is going to let you do a very wide forward cleave. It is wide, but it is not. It does not reach as far as you think it does. So we're not doing anything. Samurai is one of many DPS, one of many jobs that do absolutely nothing until the tank has completely stopped. So if you see another Samurai that is doing damage right now, they're playing Samurai wrong. You gotta wait. Just wait. Yeah, be very patient. Be very patient. Okay, the tank has stopped. You can see they stopped. They completely just, halted motion. We're gonna do Kaze, Shifu, no finish, no finisher. Akaze again, Jinpu. Medium Gekyo. There we go. How are we gonna do Oka? Mangetsu, get into position. Tenka, finisher. We're gonna go back to Oka again. There we go. And that's basically AoE in a nutshell. That's AoE in a nutshell. Get these 2. EI Jutsu, which is Tenken. Is that how you call it? Yeah, Tenka. And then we basically go back. Fuga, Oka, Fuga, Mangetsu, Tenka, rinse and repeat. That's AoE. That's going to be AoE for the longest time. All the way to 80 something. Alright, righto. Continuing on. Level 52, we get the Hisatsu Kaiten. It's just a form of buffing your finishers, your EI Jutsu finishers, such as Higenbana on the damage over time, Midare on single target filler, or the Tenka on AoE. That's pretty straightforward. And at the same time, it also lets you burn your gauge. So, gauge for Kaiten requires 20. I'm going to upgrade the Higenbana. Now it does more damage. It's basically straightforward. Upgrade the Tenka, does more damage. It'll do so for Midare as well. Moving on, at level 54 and 56, we get a gap closer known as Gyoten and a disengagement known as Yaten. And they both require 10 gauge. So Gyoten requires 10 and it lets you basically gap close. You do a little bit of damage at the end of your animation. And the opposite is Yaten. It lets you disengage. Now the issue with Yaten, more so the issue, is placement. So if that ledge over there is the edge of the arena and your character does the disengage, you might fall off the arena. So be very careful of where your back is turned. It is very good to be fully zoomed out before you consider using the Yaten as disengage. Otherwise, Gyoten and just simply run away from your target is pretty safe. But if you know what you're doing, go ahead and toss the Yaten to disengage. Let's see, and meditate. Level 60. So typically during boss transitions, or maybe you just don't have a target during combats like I am now, the meditate, you pop it. Let me remove the text there. You pop it and your character goes into state. Every 3 seconds or so, you will gain 10 Kenki. Yep, about 3 seconds. Just don't move or let the timer expire and your character will come back up. You don't have a target, maybe the boss just left and left you and your party to kind of fiddle your fingers waiting for the boss to come back up. You can press to meditate. Just make sure you move out of the way. A lot of new players completely disregard this, or they don't even have it on their hotbar. It is a good tool to use. You can fill your Kenki gauge a little bit while you're waiting for the boss to transition back in. And now we jump into the realm of level 60 to 70. Level 62 and then 64 we get the Hisatsu Shinten and Hisatsu Kyuten. That gauge that you've been filling while fighting this whole time, it's going to seem like you have quite a bit of gauge to use, and the Kaiten is not quite enough to burn it. Well, now you have the option of burn during single target. Single target is 2 or less with the Shinten, and then burn during AoE, AoE being 3 or more with the Kyuten. Now don't use any of these without the actual buffs, the buff from the Shifu, and then of course the Jinpu. Mostly the Jinpu, which is the damage buff. Moving on, we have Hagakure. So Hagakure, let's say for instance I have 2 sigils and we're about to come up against a boss encounter in a dungeon. So we just came from a bunch of trash mobs and a dungeon, the boss itself is coming up. I have 2 sigils. I ideally want to start at 0 sigils so I can apply my Higenbana damage over time and then continue on with a normal rotation. You would then press the Hagakure, will reset your sigils back to 0, and you will gain Kenki gauge in accordance. So each sigil right now, Hagakure, will give you 10 Kenki gauge back. They used to change this all around. It used to give you 20 per sigil. Then they dropped it to 5, and then they raised it back up to 10. But either way, it gives you 10 per sigil, which is nice, and it also lets you reset the sigils. Level 68, we get Iki Shoten, and it gives you 50 Kenki gauge immediately. Now, I'm at 60. If I press the Iki Shoten, I'm technically going to go over 100 to 110, but the max is 100, so I'm unable to go above the 100 point mark, which in terms is me wasting DPS. But I will press the button nonetheless. If you're mid-rotation, you should be looking at this typically on the cooldown itself, and if it is less than 15 seconds, you should be readying yourself to burn that Kenki gauge and getting yourself ready for the button. Moving on to level 70, we get the Hisatsu Guren and Hisatsu Sene. So Guren is AoE, straight line beyond the first target. And then of course Sene is a single target heavy hitter. Sene is on straightforward, boss engages a single target out in the field. And of course Guren is on 2 or more targets. I'm going to use the Sene because most likely than not you're going to be using that more often than the other one. And of course, make sure you have your Jinpu, at least your Jinpu, and your Shifu, both buffs on your character before you even think about pressing this. And of course, at this Endwalker, they cost 50, they cost 25 instead of 50. And there you go. I'm not going to waste 2 minutes for the other one. Skipping to 76, we got Tsubame Gaeshi. It gives you a mirror action of the original Iaijutsu, but with increased potency. What that means is when you use Iaijutsus, so let's use Higenbana. which you should honestly never use. I never use Higanbana with Gaeshi. There's almost never a chance of you having two targets. So if I were to use Higanbana here, notice how the Gaeshi turns into the Higanbana itself, and I can press it again to apply a upgraded version doing even more potency. The potency is quite substantial. Now, if that's typically used on a single target. Remember the thing that I told you about before about the single targets, how they should be individually separated. So you would typically apply that to the for example, an add. You would apply the Higanbana to the add, and then you would apply the upgraded Gaeshi, version to the boss itself. The only issue with using this on ads is ads die quickly, so most of the time you're just going to be wasting it. The better use of this is to use it on Midare, on a single target, and then Tenka on AoE. My gauge is filling up, so we're going to use it on... Oh, here's Gurren. Good stuff, right? So this is Midare instead. And this is Tenka. At level 80 we get Shoha. Shoha is pretty straightforward. You've used 3 EI Jutsu weapon skills. You get these 3 little icons below your Kenki gauge. Once you've used 3 of them back to back, it doesn't have to be back to back, but once you've used 3, you are able to use Shoha on a target. It's just a general ability you can weave between weapon skills, or quote-unquote GCDs. As soon as you have it, just press it. It's a nice notion to use, so you can do a little bit of extra damage, and you can also save it for a nice burst window. The only thing is, you need to use it so it consumes the Shoha. In other words, it consumes the 3 stacks. If you do not use the Shoha, you do not stack any more than the 3 that you have. In other words, if I toss another EI Jutsu here, it doesn't go to 4, it stays at 3. So make sure you use it, consume it, and then rinse and repeat.
Thank you to all of my Patreon members, as well as any contributors, both old and new. Thanks for watching. Click here to subscribe to this channel. If you wish to join Tempest Discord, if interested in joining Tempest Talon's free company in Crystal Brynhilder, finally consider supporting us on Patreon or other donation sites in the description below. This channel is a work in progress and will always seek to improve. Thank you.